since she was 5 years old and her mother gave her her first set of colored pencils. Melissa Richards would turn any piece of paper into her own world. In the small wooden house where she grew up, the walls of her room were covered with drawings of made-up landscapes, people she saw at the bus stop, and animals she had never seen in real life. Melissa was the daughter of a cleaning lady and a factory worker who worked different shifts. As a child, Melline saw her parents come home from work worn out. Money was never easy to come by. Sometimes it didn't even last until the end of the month. The fridge was always empty, and the spaces there told stories of hard decisions. Art doesn't make you feel full. Her father would tell Maddie, "You need to study something that gives you security." He would say this in a rough voice, like he knew how heavy the world was. Even when her high school art teacher showed her parents their daughter's great drawings and talked about art school scholarships, they said, "We can't take risks. She needs a safe future." So Melline went down the safe path. She worked at a diner after school to pay for her business administration class in college. Her notebooks had more drawings than notes, but she kept going, swallowing the lump in her throat every time she passed an art exhibit. When she was 23, she got a job at Tech Future while Melline was sitting at a small desk. In the financial department, her job was to check reports, feed spreadsheets, and go to endless meetings where she had to act like she was interested. At first, she still drew. She carried a notepad with her and drew what she saw during lunch in the building garden, drawing birds flying, clouds changing shape, and a stranger's profile. That's how she met him. Harold Jenkins, who was in his early 60s, had been the building's cleaner for more than 20 years. He had deep wrinkles around his eyes that stood out when he smiled, big calloused hands, and a perfectly pressed gray uniform. One afternoon, while Melline was drawing, she felt a presence behind her. "You have a gift," he said in a rough but gentle voice. It was the start of an unlikely friendship between the young administrator and the old caretaker. During lunches, they shared stories. Harold talked about his late wife Eleanor, who painted on the weekends and spent hours and hours in a small studio she built in the basement of their house. Eleanor always said that painting was like breathing. It was something you had to do. Harold told me about his eyes shining with longing, and I told him about my dreams that were being stifled. Her drawings that were kept in folders. Harold listened to her carefully, as if every word were important. As the years went by, 1 to 5 Tech Future grew, and Melline lived through a number of reorganizations. Even though her salary went up, she was less satisfied with her job, and she had less time to draw. Victor Mercer, her boss, was a power-hungry jerk who rarely gave praise in public. In private, Melline became his favorite target. Maybe because she never fought back, or maybe because her eyes still sparkled after years of work, which annoyed him. Melline's desk was now full of sticky notes, due dates, and numbers that needed to be added up. Her sketchbook started to gather dust in the drawer. Harold noticed the change when they did talk, noticing that her shoulders were slouching more and her smile taking longer to show. Life is too short for regrets. He would look at her with worry and say, "Maddie." Eliana found out about that too late, but Melline just smiled. Sadly, some people can follow their dreams. Harold needs to pay his bills. On a rainy March Tuesday, everything changed. The finance department was in a tizzy at first, and rumors of more layoffs were flying like wildfire. Victor called a general meeting for 10 a.m., and Melline had a bad feeling, but she ignored it because she was smart, always on time, and never missed a day. She was safe, right? As usual, Victor walked into the crowded meeting room with 2 people from the Human Resources Department following him. "As you all know, we are undergoing strategic changes," he began in a cold tone. "We need to optimize our processes, and unfortunately, some positions have become redundant." She looked around the room and finally found Melline. "Miss Richards, after a careful review, we have come to the conclusion that your performance does not align with the company's objectives. Your contract will end today." There was a deafening silence. Melissa felt like someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over her, and her face burned with shame. Her hands shook slightly, and her co-workers turned their heads away. Some whispered to her, "You can get your things now, that HR has already prepared your documents." These were the same people she had coffee and lunch with. Victor ended, already moving on to the next topic, as if he had just talked about the weather. Meline stood up slowly. The steps to leave the meeting room seemed to take forever, and each one was a huge effort. On her desk, a cardboard box was already set up, and she started to pack her things: picture frames, pins, a small plant, and the forgotten drawing pad. As she walked down the main hallway towards the lifts, the workers watched her with a mix of pity and relief that it wasn't them. That's when she saw Harold pushing his cleaning cart in the corner of the hallway. Their eyes met, and she tried to smile. "Time for what, Harold?" Meline asked. "To breathe, Maddie," Elenina used to say. He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and wrote down an address. 37, Magnolia Street, Magnolia City. "The studio of Eliana has been waiting for you for too long." Harold gave Meline the key and told her that his late wife had a small studio that he never had the guts to sell or take apart. The space, a small room next to his house, had been empty for a long time that night after hours of crying in her small flat. Meline drove to the address, which was a simple house in the suburbs with a well-kept garden. The number 37 was written on a wooden plaque at the front door. The key fit perfectly into the lock. The room was a small room that had been turned into a studio. There were tall windows that let in natural light, and easels that were covered with sheets, shelves with dried paint pots, and brushes that had been left in jars. There were some fabrics and blank canvases leaning against the walls. A machine for sewing Harold's wife was an artist who made a lot of different things. There was a mix of dust, oil paint, and memories in the air. In the middle was a big piece of paper with a letter to Meline. Eliana always said that the studio had a special energy and that the walls absorbed and returned creativity in spades. Since she left, the space has been empty and waiting. When I saw you drawing that first day, I knew that Elenina would have loved to meet you because you share the same light in your eyes when you create. This space is now yours because of your talent and spirit as the artist you've always been, even when the world tried to tell you otherwise. Life is too short to live someone else's dream. Harold, she walked through the studio, touching the surfaces, feeling the energy of the place on impulse. She removed one of the sheets, revealing an old but sturdy easel. She found a pad of paper in a drawer and a case of charcoal that still seemed usable. And then, as if something inside her had awakened from a long sleep, she felt an immense desire to draw. In the following months, Meline delved headlong into transforming the studio, the space once dusty and neglected, now came alive in her hands. Each brush stroke was like a breath, a rediscovery of the passion that had always been there, but had been silenced by the demands of adult life. Initially, she painted for herself, as if each canvas was an intimate conversation between her and her own heart, an attempt to reclaim something that seemed lost. But with each canvas, she filled fear still accompanied her like a silent shadow, waiting for the right moment to appear with the severance money and what she had saved over the years. Meline managed to support herself and invest in her art. The fear of failing, of investing everything in a dream and having nothing to offer in return, was deeply rooted in her. It was the same fear that had accompanied her since childhood, when her family faced financial difficulties and dreams were just luxuries they couldn't afford. Even in the silence of the studio, with colors spreading across the canvases, she felt the weight of insecurity, as if every choice was a risky bet, and yet something inside her refused to give up. Even in the face of doubt, she knew it was time to take a risk, but the fear of returning to square one, of not being able to support herself, was still an obstacle to overcome. She maintained her friendship with Harold. He encouraged her, invited friends to see her works, and promoted her work among acquaintances. The first painting she sold was to Harold's niece, who wanted a portrait of her newborn son. The payment was modest, but the feeling that someone valued her art enough to pay for it was indescribable. Orders grew. and with them her confidence. She started paying rent to Harold. Even though he tried to refuse, she reimagined that place which was so dear to his wife, and it had life once again. In 6 months, Meline already had a small, loyal clientele. She expanded to illustrations for children's books, then to murals in local cafes. She created an online page to showcase her portfolio. Orders increased over time. She had to hire an assistant to help with the administrative part. The studio came to life again. Meline replaced the old paints, renovated the walls, and installed better lighting, but she kept the essence of the space, respecting Elenina's memory. On a special shelf, she placed a picture of her found among the studio's belongings, a middle-aged woman smiling in front of a canvas with brushes in her hand and paint on her fingers. 2 years after losing her job, Meline lived off of her art alone, and for the first time in her life, she felt complete. Her name was starting to get known in the local art scene. And one day, she got an unexpected call. A children's book publisher wanted to make a big deal with her to illustrate several books. She couldn't believe it. While all of this was going on, Meline worked on a special piece for weeks, focusing on it during the breaks between orders. It was a double portrait based on an old, yellowed photo she had found hidden in a drawer in her studio. In the photo, Harold and Elenina looked happy and smiled at the camera while standing by a lake. Meline looked at the faces, smiles, and light in their eyes very carefully, and then she used that image in her painting. Harold and Elenina were older, with whiter hair and more noticeable wrinkles, but their eyes still sparkled as if they had aged together, which they should have if fate hadn't had other plans. On a normal day, she called Harold to show him her new works, and he promptly went like a proud father. Meline led him to a private room where the special painting was draped in a cloth. "I have something for you," she said, removing the cloth. Harold stood still in front of the screen, his eyes filled with tears as he looked at the portrait. He and Elenina growing old together in a different world where she was still by his side. "I found a picture of you too. The rest was imagination and gratitude. You gave me more than a studio," Meline told him as she held his hand. "Harold gave me courage." Harold, a quiet man who was always very wise, told the young woman, "Life is too short for regrets. Maddie, the right doors open at the right time, but it's up to us to have the courage to walk through them." And Meline, looking at her well-lit studio, paint-stained hands, and the happy life she had created, couldn't help but agree that she was ready to live intensely. Most importantly, she had learned not to let fear stop her from doing what really mattered. If you liked the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, take a look at the video that just showed up on your screen. See you soon.